We are at Westminster today, but that's not the norm for you, and especially not in the run-up to the EU referendum, when the Labour Party has been campaigning for the UK to remain in the EU. How has that been going?
Very well, very interesting. I've been doing a vast amount of travelling around the country. Weekend before last, I managed to spend 14 hours on trains between events. And the weekend just gone, I was in Scotland. Before I went up to Aberdeen and Dundee and Glasgow.
But what are you seeing when you do these epic and tours that sound very exhausting? But
they're not exhausting at all.
No?
No, not at all. What's exhausting about a train journey?
Well, yeah, one of them maybe, but 14 hours of them.
No, it's okay because I read a lot.
Okay. So, I mean, what people are saying in the last few weeks especially is that there's concern that the Labour Party isn't reaching enough people or enough of its potential voters and persuading them to stay in the EU, and one of the reasons for that is the issue of migration. Is that what you're seeing when you travel up and down?
There are concerns, of course. There are concerns that people don't understand the EU particularly well. Most people never asked for this referendum. It's something they've been offered, but the implications of it are obviously huge. The message I give is that we have, because of pressure after Maastricht and so on, the pressure we've achieved, the working week, working time directive, paternity and maternity leave, very important. The whole principles of equality and disability access have been gained, and transfer of employment undertakings has been protected. So some of those things are very important. There is still a problem of undercutting of wages. So I've been campaigning for what's called the Posting of Workers Directive. Very strange title. It sounds like something to do with the post office. It's not. It's about where workers are taken from one jurisdiction to another, and their paying conditions are of the lower paid end. So if they're coming, for example, from, say, Slovakia, group of workers taken from Slovakia, put on a building site in Lancashire, being paid Slovakian wages in Lancashire, providing they cover the minimum wage.
So it's undercutting. It's a way of
absolutely
undercutting.
Because it's undercutting the working rule agreement in the construction industry. It's undercutting the overall agreements on skill rates and skill rates of pay within that industry. So it's quite a serious issue. I have demanded the British government sign it. They have now agreed that they support it. So what I'm interested in doing is ending the exploitation of migrant workers and ending the undercutting here. The two things are not opposites, they're actually part of the same coin.
But when you say those things, and when the Labour Party says those things as you do you think that sort of allays the concerns that people are having about migration? Because it seems to be that those concerns are what are driving people to say they want to vote to leave the EU.
To some extent, what I'm also saying is that the Migrant Impact Fund, which Gordon Brown set up when Labour was in government before, was cancelled by this government. That would have provided about 50 million a year, maybe a bit more, to impact on communities. The Migrant Impact Fund would help with school places, help with housing, and so we're pushing very hard on that. It was cut. So I'm asking that come back as quickly as possible. But I'm also asking people to be realistic and think for a moment. 52,000 non-British European nationals work in our NHS. Tens of thousands of people, mainly from Commonwealth countries, also work in our NHS. And there are 1.2 million British people living permanently in Europe, other parts of Europe. There are nearly another million who work some of their time in Europe or live some of their time in Europe. And so there's a big impact in every direction on this. And what I'm arguing about is if we follow the logic of those that want us to leave the European Union, we go on a sort of race to the bottom by cutting corporation tax, cutting working conditions, going for lower rates of pay, and having a sort of free-for-all economy trying to undercut Europe in order to gain business. Well, that surely is not the way forward.
I mean, you're not just travelling up and down the country while campaigning ahead of an EU referendum. It seems like you do that a lot anyway. Why is that such a big part of your political life?
I was elected leader of this party, and it was a surprising result to many people.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me the whole issue was that politics was too remote, decision making was too remote, and contacts were too remote. And so I have been a member of Parliament longer than anybody else who sought the leadership of the party, and so I kind of do understand Parliament fairly well, I suppose. And I think it's easy to get yourself into a kind of place of remoteness. And so what I do is I spend Monday morning in my constituency. I come into the office Monday afternoon. I'm here until Wednesday evening in Parliament. Prime Minister's question time, statements, debates, lots of meetings with colleagues and things like that. And then Thursday I'm off on a visit, campaigning visit, talking to people, meeting people, visiting places. Usually it includes a college or university or both. And then I spend the rest of the week either there and then at least one other full day in my constituency, so that I guarantee my constituency a full day and the Monday morning. I do all my advice bureaus because it's very important, not just because they've elected me to represent them, but it's also very important that I'm actually listening to people who've got a problem, they can't pay the rent. I'm trying to deal with that kind of issue, because at the end of the day it's about people's daily lives, and then frame our general policies on austerity, general policies on equality, general policies on opportunity, general policies on peace and human rights around the world from that.
When you were elected, it was amidst so much enthusiasm and excitement. It was a landslide victory, and the Labour Party membership swelled. Do you still see that enthusiasm up and down the country?
Absolutely. The enthusiasm of members for doing things was absolutely huge, and we have packed out events all over the place, and I try to make sure I spend as much time there as I can and talk to everybody. So we had an event in Wolverhampton a few weeks back. It was well oversubscribed. 500 people came, apparently 1,000 applied to come.
Oh, wow.
And
still pulling the crowds then?
So we stayed there for the evening. I made a fairly short speech, as one or two other people did, and then I stayed there till just shy of midnight, and I talked to every single person that was there.
Oh, wow.
And some people, obviously the conversations were fairly brief, inevitably, but some of them were very interesting, and so I like to spend time talking to people and listening to what they have to say, because that's the way you kind of understand things.
And when you speak to the women who come to these events, as they do, what sort of concerns are you hearing?
A combination. Some are the general concerns that you'd hear from men as well, on issues of economy, issues of housing and so on like that. Quite a lot about excuse me, issues of equal pay and issues of opportunity, and quite a lot when you get into a deeper conversation about the way in which cuts in adult social care, the longer time older people stay in hospital because they can't get adult social care, and the unstated pressure on many middle-aged women to give up their jobs, give up their careers in order to care for elderly parents. They love their parents, they want to look after them, they want to help them. It's a natural thing, but they somehow or other feel it falls on them to do it. And so the burden of the cuts in adult social care fall wholly disproportionately on women. The numbers of people that joined the Labour Party is huge. We're now a party of, including registered supporters, about 500,000, which is the biggest it's been in my lifetime. And this membership is probably still a majority men over the whole picture, but there's more women joined than men in the past year to the party. And I'm very proud that in my own constituency we have a majority of women members. I've tried to set an example by appointing a majority of women to the shadow cabinet and to the shadow positions, and also have an equalities team of 3 of them that are very serious about how they pursue all this. And so the 2 Kates and the cat, Kate Green, Kate Osamore and Cat Smith, are doing a brilliant job. Very proud of them.
I mean, pretty much since you did appoint that first shadow cabinet, there have been these concerns aired, and it's come from inside the Labour Party as well as in terms of sort of political commentary. There's been concerns about the Labour Party under your leadership having a perceived women problem. What do you think when you hear that? How does that make you feel as the leader of the party, but also as, you know, kind of figurehead of the progressive left movement in the UK?
Well, it's a perception that I wonder where it comes from, and I wonder why it's being made, but I'll take it as it's said.
Yeah.
If there is a perception, I would want to remove that perception. I would want to make sure people understand a couple of things. One is that women are very welcome in the party, that we do have women's groupings in every constituency, and they can be a very effective way, because women tend to do things politically in a much more effective way than men, because they're less rigid and regimental about how they conduct meetings, much more inclusive, much freer at speaking at their opinions, so much better at coming to conclusions, whereas a male-dominated meeting tends to be hierarchical, slow-moving, and occasionally very boring, which is very off-putting.
Sounds awful.
Yeah. You've been to those, have you?
I think one or two.
You've been to one or two. And so women's meetings that I get invited to, I find that sense of discussion very good. I think it's important that women feel welcome in the party and feel that their views are being heard and are being put forward. So John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor, I think it's probably the first time, did a women's impact assessment of the budget, the last budget. I don't think that's ever been done before. And I would see that as the norm of what we do. So in the way that in law, any bill before Parliament has to have a human rights assessment, because that's what the Human Rights Act says, which the government wants to get rid of, I think we should also have an impact assessment. And so I had long discussions with Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett on this, who wrote The Spirit Level. This whole idea of how you do an impact assessment of what public policy is about. So I want our budgetary making to be judged on the effects on women, on the effects on equality, on the effects on the environment, on the effects on poverty in this country, because we have a job to do as a party. That's why we exist.
I mean, when we look at, in terms of gender equality, the Labour Party does do this best. It's got 42% of its MPs are women at the moment. The SNP is something like 36%. The Conservatives have managed 20%. So, and I know you're committed to 50%, and that's great, but what about beyond that? I mean, once you've got them into Parliament, is that it? Is it job done, or is there more that you can do to ensure
there's a lot more you can do. Getting women into Parliament is obviously important, and that is a big step. And so I was very supportive of the campaigns in the 1980s for all women shortlists, and also the acceptance of black self-organisation in the party. So we had black sections in the party from the 1980s onwards. Those all-women shortlists have meant a lot more women have been elected to Parliament. But it also means Parliament has got to think about the way it operates, the way it behaves, and the way it does things. And I personally am no lover of the abusive theatre behaviour in Parliament. I'm not interested in it. I don't get involved in it. It's just not a sensible way of conducting yourselves, and it's very off-putting to an awful lot of people, and women particularly are very put off by that. There's also, of course, then, the promotion of women within Parliament, but also the effectiveness of Parliament, because it's not just about appointments of women to shadow cabinet or shadow positions, or indeed in government ministerial or deputy ministerial positions. It's also about the way Parliament conducts itself. So the election for select committees, the election of membership of select committees, and we're getting there on the gender balance on committees, we're getting there on the gender balance on delegations, but there is still a long way to go on that.
Yeah, the Labour Party introduced the Equal Pay Act in 1970. Today, women are still paid on average 20% less, count the years. What do we have to do to get equal pay?
We have to, first of all, applaud applaud and extol Barbara Castle
Yeah.
for bringing in the Equal Pay Act.
Yeah.
Barbara introduced the act or the bill in 1970, became an act. Well done, Barbara. The pay gap remains now at around 20%, and how it works in local government, for example, you end up with grades, say school cleaners tend to be women, school kitchen assistants tend to be women, the chef might be a man, and so on and so on and so on, and you start adding it up across the piece, and you see how it works, that a low-paid job is done by women, a slightly higher-paid job by men, and that's how you get this gap. That's in.
But it's also it's women being paid less for the same job.
And coming on to that, it's also women getting absolutely less than men for the same job, which is illegal and has to be challenged. And there's been a lot of challenges, particularly on local government, on this. I would want to do a pay audit of all companies and all organisations. I would want to improve access to employment tribunals. At the moment, costs could be awarded against the person that takes the case to the tribunal. Many people are completely unrepresented at tribunals. Only those represented by a trade union are likely to get a fair hearing. So it's a good case for joining a trade union, of course, to achieve that. But it also goes into career perceptions and perceptions of children in school or young people 16 onwards and the career choices they make. And I think there is a serious issue here about schools for 14 and 15-year-olds, the lack of any mentoring or career advice for most young people. So it means that if you've got articulate, well-connected parents, you get work experience, you get placements, you get internships because they know how to do it. If your parents don't have that social network, if your parents don't speak English, then you don't have any of those networks. You don't get that support at home in the same way that others do. So you can see how the thing begins to build in. And it's also encouraging girls into the belief of what they can achieve and what they can do. Why aren't there more women engineers? Why aren't there more women scientists? It's improving, sure. There are now a lot more women lawyers coming through, and I think in 10, 15 years' time we'll see a lot of women judges and senior judges at that, which is great. But there are still areas that have got to change, and so I'm having a reception here for women engineers next month.
Good for you.
My niece is an engineer. She's brilliant, and she's
What kind of engineer?
She's a petroleum engineer. She works on oil rigs.
Fantastic.
Oh, she's great. Very proud of her. She's lovely. And so it's also saying, actually, women can achieve it. My mum taught me all this. She was a careers advisor in school, and she used to give these girls such lectures about why they weren't becoming engineers and scientists. She was right.
So, was she a sort of inspirational figure in the sense of
course,
an awareness of these issues?
Yes, I mean, she was a teacher and very thoughtful person, very involved in just about everything, very strong peace campaigner, and somebody that loved history and the natural world and rural life. And I learned a lot from her.
We were talking earlier about the government's austerity cuts and how they disproportionately have hit women. You know, we've seen report after report, charity after charity has said that they're hitting women twice as hard, not just because of things like benefit cuts and cuts to tax credits, but also, you know, if you slash local council budgets, then you're also slashing vital public services, social care, social housing, and you mentioned before access to legal aid. All those things are disproportionately affecting women. What can the Labour Party do in opposition?
In a crisis point, it affects women worst of all because of the lack of secure places, the lack of safety, the lack of refuges, lack of women's centres, lack of advice. These are victims of domestic violence, are often in a very desperate situation. In opposition, we can try and encourage our local government that we control, although the funding for it is, of course, not locally controlled, to provide those facilities and those resources. We can oppose and can make demands on the government, And we don't underestimate what's happened in the past 6 months. We've significantly defeated the government on working tax credit cuts. That meant 3 million families didn't lose £1,000 this year. That's a lot of money. We defeated them on personal independence payments for disabled people that they were trying to introduce in the budget. We can defeat them on things, and we knock them back on academies. And so sort of strident parliamentary opposition in a very determined way, accompanied by a public campaign, does make a difference. But it's also about empowering people in communities and saying, well, actually, it doesn't have to be like this, because I think sometimes we look at ourselves, our rights, our powers in a kind of upside down way. We assume that, for example, all these good things that I mentioned about the European Union, the Working Time Directive and all that, came as a gift from the Commission. Thank you, Commission, you're so kind, you're wonderful.
We're so
Commission.
grateful.
We're so grateful, we're ever so humble, sir.
Yeah, you need a cap to doff there, don't you?
I've got one somewhere.
You have got one?
I've got my black cap, yeah. If I had it, I'd doff my cap and say thanks. But actually, no, it was nothing to do with that. It came because a lot of trade unions all over Europe campaigned for it. How did the Equal Pay Act come about? Barbara Castle was brilliant. I knew Barbara very well. I mean, if you had an argument with Barbara, you remembered it. She was good at arguments, oh yes. But she had this utter determination to get things through, and she got it through.
And just finally, in terms of your leadership so far, I mean, there have been various challenges. It wouldn't be accurate to describe your path as strewn with flowers, apart from the ones from your allotment. But what?
They're very organic vegetables from my allotment.
No flowers in your allotment?
Oh, there are flowers, yes. We have nasturtiums and things around the place. But
well,
also we have comfrey growing, because that's very good for the bees.
Hasn't been strewn with flowers or anything else from an allotment. But, I mean, when there are moments when you think, all right, these challenges are just ridiculous and insurmountable, what is it that keeps you motivated and keeps you going?
A lot of people supported what we're trying to do, trying to democratise the party, trying to put it in a radical direction that empowers people and fundamentally brings about a more just and more equal society. And I get that, and I get the huge amount of support of people that have supported all of us here. It's not just me, there's a team of people here to do this, and that's why I spend so much time travelling around the country, being in touch with people to understand what's going on, and I'll carry on doing that. Also, it's important to have a balance in life, to be reading other things, to occasionally be doing other things, and keep yourself calm, which I try to do.
Meditation?
No,
yoga?
I don't really do meditation. No, I cycle a bit, I run a bit, I look after my allotment, I read things. And
read things that aren't political?
Well, I mean, lots of things are political in a way. I'm reading a very interesting book about a girl growing up in South Africa under apartheid. She wrote the book herself. She came to an event in Birmingham last week and gave it to me. Very nice gift. And it's a wonderful book. Wonderful book, because it's describing the sheer brutality of a black girl trying to get education in a third-rate school for black kids, where she was quite brutally treated, but had a love of history and knowledge, and she got a scholarship because she recited a bit of Shakespeare perfectly. So reading I love. I love reading well outside the you can spend your whole life reading economic analyses of this, that and the other.
You could.
But actually you've got to understand how people think and what they do. And also a society where people can express themselves, where art, where culture, where entertainment, where all those expressive things are there for people to really enjoy. And that makes for a much more cohesive and coherent society. That's the joy of our world.
Well, now I feel like I want to raid your bookshelves, but meanwhile...
Lots of them are here in the office, actually, because I haven't got space at home.
Might have a quick look, but thank you so much for joining us at the pool. Thank you, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you.